And welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. So I want you to imagine something with me for a moment. Imagine that you are an orphan, okay? Now, obviously, nobody wants to be an orphan. Everybody ideally wants to have a mother and father, who love them, who take care of them. But imagine that you're an orphan. It's not great circumstances, right? That's why we write movies and stories about orphanages. They're not the most ideal circumstances. I think you and I can both agree on that. Imagine that once you're in the orphanage, you are recruited to be used as a guinea pig for a National Institute of Health, an NIH-funded study to put toxic mercury in your head to see if it's bad for you. Well, we want to know if mercury's bad for you. Now, while that's going on, I want you to also imagine that while you're being experimented on by an NIH-funded study about whether or not mercury is good for you, I think we all know that it's not. You're also being sexually abused and molested because, shocker, the orphanage is home to a pedophile ring of very evil, sick men. Imagine that when you finally get the nerve to become a whistleblower and say, hey, I am being molested inside this orphanage, and authorities are alerted. Imagine when that happens, the people at NIH and the scientists involved in doing this guinea pig study continue the study. Now imagine that after all of this is over with, that study that was conducted on you about whether or not mercury in dentistry is safe is used as the bedrock study, falsely by the way, to put out there that mercury is safe, and all of these people who are telling you that it's not are wrong because we've got this one study. We've got this one study right here that's going to prove all of the naysayers wrong. And it just happened to be a study where kids were molested. That is a story that is that is a story that is up right now over at nationalfile.com. by our friend Noel Fritsch. He wrote it back on March the 11th. This headline, exclusive victims of NIH Mercury study blew whistle on rampant sex abuse in orphanage. The deeply flawed NIH study continued. A controversial NIH-funded study many dentists in the medical establishment cite as evidence that mercury causes no harm. And the history behind that is terrible. Now, this took place in Portugal, and this took place in the early 2000s. Noel Fritsch writes that a controversial NIH study that many dentists in the medical establishment cite as evidence that mercury causes no harm was pushed forward despite credible evidence on an industrial scale, child sex abuse scandals targeting a vulnerable population of Portuguese orphans. According to a National File investigation and NIH documents released after FOIA requests, many of those orphans have suffered devastating effects of prolonged exposure to mercury during the study, which came to be known as the Casa Pia study, in addition to the abuse, which was widely reported on by the mainstream media. The NIH's only response was to fire off several rounds of emails a year after the scandal first surfaced in an effort to make it appear that they had done all appropriate due diligence with respect to the scandal. The investigation into sex abuse at Casa Pia began in 2002 and was widely covered by international media, including the New York Times, Reuters, The Guardian, CBS, and BBC. Now, much of this happened after you had convictions from the child abusers. Top Portuguese luminaries were found guilty of involvement with child sourcing and pedophile prostitution ring that exploited children from state-run orphanages, including one of Portugal's most famous television presenters and a former ambassador, along with six others. The controversial Mercury study continued apace until its completion in 2008, despite the scandal having been widely reported on beginning in 2002. The abuse whistleblower, who was about 10 years old at the time, blew the whistle in 2002. The NIH-funded study's top authors and researchers participated in sweeping the known sex abuse scandal under the rug so that the study could continue, hiding it from government watchdogs for approximately 1 year. According to the BBC, child psychologists found that more than 100 children were likely to have been abused at some point during the so-called Casa Pia study. And unfortunately, police were only able to push the matter forward in only a minority of abuse cases, though half a dozen abusers were ultimately convicted. Casa Pia, through various schools and homes, cares for about 1,800 orphans and children whose families are not able to care for them. A man named Pedro Namora, a lawyer and a former pupil who helped journalist Felicia Cabrita break the story in 2002, remembers his teacher's dedication with fondness. Namora also condemned the director's failure to safeguard the well-being of other children at the time. Quote, these were kids from deprived backgrounds seen as rubbish, Namora said. Incidents were reported, but officials washed their hands of it. The results of the Casa Pia study have now been used for decades to perpetuate the continued poisoning of children and adults with mercury. Noel Fritz writes, the now infamous Casa Pia study has since become widely relied upon as the linchpin study, making the case for continued use of toxic mercury in humans, especially in the dental setting or the dentist setting when you go to the dentist. Now, that's why we're going to turn now to Anita Tibau, who's quoted in this article. It says, Anita Tibau is a researcher and international advocate who has tirelessly pushed for a worldwide mercury ban for the last 25 years. She knows about this topic very well, extensively, in fact, and that's why I reached out to her to have her on the program. Anita, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you again. We haven't spoken since last year, but when I read this story, I knew I had to have you on, especially when I saw you quoted in it. How are you? Doing okay?
Yeah, I'm traveling a lot, and like a lot of my colleagues, we all got this head cold. It seems like it's a never-ending thing. So please forgive my voice and my nasal speaking.
It is okay.
But this is just so important that when you asked me to come and do the show, I couldn't refuse because of the timeliness of what's happening with this entire Casa Pia story. In 2012, I went with a colleague of mine to Portugal to work on an undercover expose with a journalist there who addressed the mercury side of this story, but never put together the molestation side, which is now in the news everywhere because of the Jeffrey Epstein files. That I'm hoping now that the kids that were involved in the original study will be able to have restitution and help, because our government taxpayer dollars funded this study of about $11 million, which, triple that in today's currency. And the most problem that I always had with all of this information was in 2002, when they found out that these kids were being molested, they did not stop the study. And they really did. They did like a magic trick, and they kept it going. And they used this as the foundation to say mercury is safe. And therefore, in 2006, when they published this paper saying that mercury in dentistry is safe, it became the benchmark. And here we are 20 years later, and they're still at the FDA saying that it's safe, even though the same authors that appeared in Noel's article 10 years later said, okay, if you have mercury in your head, you're poisoned for life.
Now, hang on, wait a second. You mean the people that that were the authors of this study later changed their minds and said, wait, no, mercury is bad for you, and yet for now 25 years?
It's in Noel's article, which is absolutely brilliant because he covered so many parts of this thing. And it's such a huge story that nobody knows about. But yet, when you consider that they still put mercury in the military, they put it in our veterans, they put it in babies and poor people, this is an ongoing problem. It is the only use in the human body that's legal, and more than 180 million U.S. citizens have mercury in their heads today. It's such an outrage, and they continue to put it in. So I'm praying with this story that it goes, although that's another part of the story. The story continues to evolve. As I mentioned to you, it was censored on the EIN press wire. We wanted to do a press release on Monday. It was announced at the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology meeting that happened last weekend, and everybody was going to follow it and share on their social medias and so on and so forth. And when the article went into PR Newswire, or EIN press wire, excuse me, they said that the investigation is speculative. Okay?
So I'm going to interrupt you here. So just so you know, you see on your screen there, EIN Press Wire. Okay, this is just the world's leading. They brand themselves as the world's leading press release distribution service. You can reach millions with one click when you use their service. A way to get your message out. If you're an organization, they've got the way to do it. Okay, so you guys sent. Use their service to send it out to the wire. Hey, look, we've got this story, and they said it's speculative. Wonder why. What was it specifically the story that Noel Fritz was running, or a variation of that story on a national file?
Yes, it was the information that he reported on, and distilled down for a normal press release. Okay.
And they rejected your press release because...
They rejected it. They rejected it twice. Okay? So talk about censorship. It's alive and well, just so your audience knows. And the thing is, this is all based on freedom of information documents. All of it. This is not speculative at all. The documents exist. A lot of them are in the public domain. And... this, to me, is so outrageous, because when we can think of the big lawsuits that came before, like the tobacco or the Roundup. Now we have COVID lawsuits that are starting to pop up. And they're burying this story. And this story is so important to humanity because, one, so many people, even just this alone, have mercury in their teeth today, and they don't know it's a neurotoxin. They've been told it's silver. They've been told it's safe by the FDA, and they have been told that you don't have to worry about it, when everything that they have been told is really based on current science is not true.
Well, and I know you are exactly right about that. We've had you on several times talking about it. You have spoken at the United Nations. You've been trying. Well, just so everybody knows, let's just remind everybody that Europe has essentially abandoned mercury, but here in America, we're still holding on the last grasp of this neurotoxin that we want to still keep in dentistry. And you've got these organizations, like the American Dental Association. It just seems like they refuse to change with the times. They refuse to acknowledge what they've done and what they're continuing to do. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, because, when the whole European Union, 27 countries, banned it in 2025, and I was at the last UN meeting, it was the Conference of the Parties 6. And mind you, I've participated since before it became the Minamata Convention on Mercury Treated. My first trip to the UN was in 2002. So I've spent, 25 years in that system, watching the corruption at a global level, not just a U.S. level, but the global level. And what was the consensus or agreed upon at this last meeting at the UN in November was that we would wait another 9 years for the rest of the world to ban mercury in dentistry. Well, I was so outraged by that. I said, no. We have to do something else. And the only thing that really came to my mind was this Casa Pia story And it's based on everything that's happening in the world today with the Epstein files. So
I think
I
that's
pretty much,
a very smart and in reasonable thing to compare to. I mean, I don't know. In what world are you an NIH researcher? Trying. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that they're really there to find out the truth about Mercury. We want to know the truth about it. In what world, in the midst of the study, does a pedophile ring get busted at the orphanage and you don't end the study? I mean, you don't even have, it doesn't even have to be specifically a scientific study. If you were doing any activity, if you or me or any normal person were engaged in some sort of project and you found out the people that you were working with or in the vicinity of were involved in molesting children and a pedophile ring, you would back away from that and know this is going to delegitimize everything that I'm doing. But no, the NIH-funded study, the people in Portugal didn't. They didn't back away. They didn't abandon, and the study continued for years after that. And they did it because it was a cover-up. And I want to get your response to that, but I'm going to throw this back up here because this is incredible to me. Noel Fritsch, nationalfile.com, writes, emails show the researchers conducting the Casa Pia study knew about the ongoing sex abuse scandal. Despite this major red flag and despite government regulations in place designed to protect the subjects of studies, especially vulnerable populations, like orphans who don't have a mom or a dad, the study continued anyway. In a 2003 email, Dr. Timothy DeRuin admitted that he had known about the sex abuse claims for a full year before notifying anyone about it. Dr. DeRuin, the Executive Associate Dean for Research and Academic Affairs at the School of Dentistry at the University of Washington, was responding to an inquiry by NIH's Lawrence Tabak. Dear Larry, Norm indicated that you wanted to hear from me directly about the situation at Casa Pia in Lisbon, and why I had not notified NIDCR earlier. In hindsight, I probably should have said something earlier. We first had any indication of a problem in October of last year when our psychologist, Dr. Brenda Towns, along with the neurologist from the University of Lisbon, and then Isabel Pavo, interviewed and examined several children who were identified as having the largest changes in behavioral test scores from the previous year. One student reported a history of sexual abuse from a staff person at one of the Casa Pia schools, but also indicated that he had reported the problem to authorities and the police. While several former students may have been affected, I did not understand this to involve scores of current students. I don't know if the rate is 2% or 3% of abused kids in this population is significantly higher than any other demographically similar populations. Oh my gosh, so right there, he's trying to justify it. Like, meh, all the other studies that we do may have abused kids. Who knows? So probably no big deal. Then he says, I do apologize for not notifying you earlier, but it was not clear to me whether the study was significantly affected. Again, are these people mad scientists, Anita? It would literally take a mad scientist to say, my work is now involved with kids who have been sexually abused, but we're going to continue the Mercury study anyway. It's wicked, man. It is a wicked type of mentality. Go ahead.
well, I did a few more things because I wanted to create a paper trail. Honestly, my first was to file a citizens petition at the FDA. About that, and I believe you had me on shortly after that.
Yes.
And that was to alert them once again at the FDA level, because the FDA is the dental device department. Okay, so they are the regulatory body, FDA dental device department, that are in charge of Mercury dental amalgam. Now, mind you, mine is not the first citizens petition. There's been many before, and there's been some after. And yet they are still dodging and saying that the mercury in dental fillings is safe. And they have used this 2006 paper to justify the continuing use of this. So that's the first thing. And that by itself is already a problem, because the study's fraught with problems, and it needs to be pulled. It really does. So I filed also a complaint with the Office of OHRP, Office of Human Research. Oh God, I can never remember it. It's one of those acronyms. OHRP.
Look, I mean, you don't want to you don't want to make me memorize acronyms, so we will take your word for it.
Yes. Okay. So the acronym is OHRP, the Office of Human Research Protection. I think it's protection. And when you start to look at their guidelines, when you do a human study, especially with children, they're supposed to have advocates. And based on what I learned, really into these documents again, is that the kids that were actually the ones that didn't have parents, the orphans in the study, there were a total of 500. Let's say 250 got mercury, 250 did not get mercury, and we don't know the numbers who were orphans or not orphans, but that's a large chunk of the study. That's a fifth of the kids should have had individual advocates, third-party people for each individual kid. That didn't happen. And that was part of the research study that was mandatory to even get the money to do the study. So all of the money that they got to do this study did not follow the guidelines that were set up when the study was originally accepted and funded. Okay? So this is also part of the bigger problem. But for them to come out in 2006, and they skewed all of the data, they didn't look at so many of the things. And we're talking about one of the researchers was an expert in genetics. And he had published on, dentists, saying that if you're exposed to mercury and you're a dentist, the outcome is bad. And this is the same guy. They're looking for a prospective study, and a prospective study for this was to see that mercury is going to be safe. That was their goal, to create a study to say it's safe and just be done with it.
Yep.
But what wound up happening is 10 years later, several of the researchers come out and say, "Oh no, it's not safe at all."
Okay, so let's talk about that. This is from the article. NIH omitted. So we can talk. I mean, we just talked about how the optics and why anybody would continue the study after the abuse. NIH omitted critical study information in order to skew the results. The NIH's Casa Pia study was designed as a prospective study to see if mercury from dental fillings would cause neurological or kidney problems in kids, the most vulnerable population. The summary of Dr. Woods and DeRuin's study claimed that mercury did not harm kids. Quote, "We observed no significant effects of dental amalgam mercury on measures of renal functional integrity during prolonged course of dental treatment in children and adolescents," end quote. But Wood's study, he makes this bold claim despite the fact that his own study admits that mercury has been known to cause renal damage since at least as far back as 1982. In the wake of the Wood study, a veritable cottage research industry developed as a hedge of protection of mercury usage, using Woods and DeRuin's Casa Pia study as the linchpin. So we always hear, and I'm more familiar with this phenomenon, Anita, when it comes to climate scientists. I've always heard, these climate scientists, they get a lot of this money. They're getting paid to do the study, but they're getting paid to do a study where we want the climate alarmism because we want the communist policies that are always the solution to protect the environment, right? Right. Is that also what's going on here? That this is just about the money? The scientists are supposed to go in there with a predetermined result? I mean, do you think that's what happened here?
Well, when you look at the data, and then you go forward into what actually got published after they had published this original research, what other conclusion can you come to except it was fraudulent from the get-go? They were looking to not find any problems, and I'm telling you, there were 55 kids in the study that showed problems while in the study at the beginning, call them adverse events. So adverse events for 55 of these participants were already known, and they didn't study on that premise. So, when you look at everything and you put all of this stuff together and understand that 20 years have passed and they're still putting mercury in people. So let's say almost 2 generations of people are being poisoned because of this same study that should be pulled regardless. It's a crime against humanity. I can't.
Yes.
I'm part of. You can't sugarcoat the obvious. You can't. You're poisoning people for profit, and that is what it is.
So if your motivations at the outset of a study like this are already nefarious or already have, you're not approaching this like a scientist would, you're already sacrificing the scientific method, that you learn in biology 101 or whatever. To me, the fact that they just ignored the child sex abuse, like, oh, let's just keep going. It just, in my gut, it just tells me, okay, well, you guys had a scheme from the beginning here, right? If you needed to get accomplished. Say that again.
I said that's if you're a common sense critical thinker. There is no other conclusion that you can come to except the one you just did.
Exactly. And to your point earlier, a subsequent reanalysis of the Casa Pia children's amalgam trial by David Greer and Mark Greer identified significant adverse effects that were obscured in the original publications, particularly among the boys. When the data were examined, some boys demonstrated markedly worse outcomes across multiple neurological and behavioral domains with increasing exposure to mercury from dental amalgam. In those adversely affected children, higher mercury exposure was associated with significant deficits in attention, memory, and motor function compared with other children. The magnitude and consistency of these differences indicate that mercury from dental amalgam produced measurable harm in particular groups of children. The Greer reanalysis demonstrates that the Casa Pia trial did not show no harm, but rather revealed substantial neurobehavioral impairment among genetically susceptible boys exposed to mercury. And yet, they took the study anyway, and just like what RFK said. I mean, RFK said that they had that he exposed. He did this in committee where they had this data that said that boys that were getting the current vaccine schedule were more prone to autism, particularly black boys, and he has evidence that they gutted that information. They literally edited all that information out to publish it to say there's nothing wrong with vaccines. So this is a pattern with these scientists, and it's ridiculous. These scientists are viewing themselves more like clergy, and this is some sort of religion. And some sort of dogma that's not based on fact, but it's just based on belief that they're forcing on the rest of the planet.
Yeah, well, when you start seeing how much money these guys got paid, it's egregious. It's just so outrageous to me. But the bigger problem is that all of these people that could have not had mercury now do, and once you have mercury placed in your teeth, there's not enough biological dentists on the planet to get it out safely. I mean, there's, in the whole grand scheme of things, we're talking about a handful of dentists that know how to do it safely to protect the patient and themselves versus everybody else. It's impossible. It's just an impossible thing. And yet they're continuing to put mercury in. Now, mind you, these kids from the Casa Pia, they're in their 30s and maybe early 40s, if they were able to even have kids, because we know that mercury creates fertility problems for both men and women. So it's just this snowball effect. And I've reached out. I'm trying to locate some of the people that participated in the study. And let me tell you, God only knows what their health status is today, because they're the only group of people that we have identified from childhood to adulthood exposure to mercury from dentistry. So, it's our duty to get back to these same individuals, these same victims, to go ahead and basically unwind what was done to them from the first part of this experiment, because that's what it was. It's a human experiment, and they call them the guinea pigs, and it's true, because these kids had no idea that the consent forms for these kids, they did not talk about the risks, and it wouldn't have really mattered, because the people who were the guardianship over these at least 100 of the kids, all they did, they just signed it off. There was no concern. Oh, wait, isn't mercury a neurotoxin? Isn't mercury a poison? Well, this was known, since the beginning of chemistry. Everybody knew that mercury was bad. Even when mercury in dentistry started in the 1850s, the people that brought it to the United States, the dental surgeons who were also MDs, they said, we can't use this. We're going to sign an oath of ethics not to use it, because we know mercury's poisonous.
Wow.
But the dental craftsman said, wait a minute, it's cheap and easy to use and we can make money. And that is how the American Dental Association was formed. Now, people think the American Dental Association, but isn't that a government agency? No. It's not like the AMA. They're suing the Association of American Association of Pediatrics. It's all the same crap. They're all corrupt. They're nonprofits that are corrupt to the core, and they're making hundreds of millions of dollars. And what are they doing with all this money? They're poisoning people. They're supporting this continuous use of mercury. It's insane.
Yeah, and they just, there's no links, as we see. There's no bridge too far that's going to get them to stop their mission. This last part here: children enrolled in the Casa Pia study were institutionalized already. They were under state guardianship. They were deprived of independent advocacy. The Casa Pia institutions were the site of systemic sexual and physical abuse spanning decades, from the 70s to the 2000s, with public exposure and staff convictions beginning in 2002, directly overlapping the study enrollment and follow-up. This environment inherently compromised voluntariness, meaning the idea that you would volunteer for this, assent, giving consent, refusal, and harm reporting. A whistleblower associated with the setting reported abuse, underscoring compounded trauma that may delay disclosure of study-related injuries and exacerbate long-term health consequences. Once institutional abuse was known, all assumptions of a protected environment collapsed, yet the study continued without reassessment, enhanced protections, or interventions. What kind of mad scientists were we funding then? What kind of mad scientists are we funding now? Give us, because I know we want to get the United States on board and get mercury out of dentistry. On a 30,000-foot view, I mean, I'm certainly glad that we have RFK in there. But
right.
What are your thoughts? How are things going right now, in your opinion? Because I know you're a part of the Maha agenda.
If he was not in this position, I would not be trying to do this from the United States. I would try to work this out of Portugal. I would try to work it out of Brazil. I would be trying something else. But we have this opportunity, because of Bobby Kennedy, to end the use of mercury in the last use inside the human body now, which is why I'm pulling out all the stops to get this known to not just the United States, but the whole world. When the whole world understands that this one study is what everybody hung their hat on to say, oh yeah, mercury's safe. I think, the cover-up is the big problem, because we're all suffering from the same thing. People that have mercury in their heads today, chances are the majority of people, and it's horrible to say, but it's the truth. People need to know the truth. If they have health problems, they better start looking in their mouth to see, hey, do you have those so-called silver fillings? They're not silver. It's mercury, 48 to 54% mercury. Mercury is a known neurotoxin. Mercury causes all kinds of havoc inside the human body, and diseases linked to mercury from dental fillings, there's a host of them. And What happened in 2016 was there was the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, another acronym, NHANES, finally published the amount of mercury inside the U.S. population versus composite resin restorations for dental fillings. And they came up with a number of people over the age of 15 have more mercury fillings than resin fillings. So if you cut the population in half, you figure, let's say 180 if there's 360 million U.S. citizens, right? But I up it because they didn't look at babies, 2-year-olds and up. And we know that they're putting mercury in babies. We know this. So that number of over 50%, we know it's going to be higher because they didn't count, a huge part of the population. And we also know there's not enough dentists to remove it. So at least we can stop poisoning people. And that's what Dr. Olimpio Faisal Pinto from Brazil said, 20 years ago at a Congress in Brazil at a federal hearing. He said, we may not be able to save everybody, but we can stop poisoning them. And this is how many years ago? I mean, this guy is 93, and he's been fighting this fight his entire life. I would like to see this end sooner than later, and our only chance to see this happen is with Bobby Kennedy, period. If he doesn't do it, then, shame on all of us, really, because we're failing. We're failing to get this out to the public because everybody needs to know this. Everybody. And I think they'd be outraged.
Well, I'm so glad that I, was introduced to you. I don't know how many years ago it was, or it may just be 1 year, 2 years. I'm not really sure, but I'm glad I was introduced to you because I actually, contacted a biological dentist because of you. I had a root canal that I felt like, was giving me problems. There's a lot, this is kind of mercury aside in terms of, root canal issues, anaerobic bacteria that can leak into your bloodstream and that sort of thing. So I sought out a biological dentist, had the root canal removed, but there was actually mercury inside the tooth still that I didn't even know was there. And so the mercury had to be removed first, and then the tooth was extracted. But in the course of talking to this particular dentist that I went to, we asked him. Me and my wife were there, during the extraction, and we were asking him. I wasn't asking as many questions because I had my mouth open, but she was asking him, how did you start to do this? Like what caused you to do this? And he said, well, I had this young man, about 18, 19, 20 years old who was on disability. He could no longer work because he had all of these health problems. And his mom came in with him and said, I would like for you to remove the mercury from his mouth. I think this mercury is what's making him so sick. And at the time, this dentist was not on board with, he wasn't anti-mercury at the time. This was back in the 80s.
Okay.
But he said, but I was a Christian, and I did believe in the idea that, hey, if this is what the patient wants, then I'm going to give them what they want. This is what they believe, and so I have an obligation. My faith, says I have an obligation to do what they're asking me to do. So he did it. He removed them. This guy had a lot of mercury fillings. And 6 months later, he was back in the workforce. 6 months later, he was off of disability, back in the workforce, and all of his health problems were gone. And he said, that was when I first realized, hey, there is something to this. And then he started researching mercury, and that's eventually, what set him on the path to become a biological dentist and kind of reject a lot of this conventional stuff that is making us sicker. Without knowing it, and root canals eventually came, was one of those things. So this is real. I say all that to say the people listening, maybe the people listening on LFA TV and other places have some health problems that are reoccurring. You're not quite sure what it is. Anita is right. Maybe you should look in your mouth. Maybe your teeth are feeding your system neurotoxins or anaerobic bacteria, and I'll let you respond to that.
Absolutely, Noel. And I'm sorry,
Paul, it's okay.
I have,
No worries.
I associate you too. Um, and it's been a long week. But Paul, the thing is, whole body health starts in your mouth. That's a fact. You cannot deny it. And medical doctors, even integrative doctors, are not telling the patient, do you have mercury fillings? Do you have a root canal? Do you have implants? Do you have nickel crowns? I mean, all these metals in the head, it is a bad, bad, bad idea. And they just keep coming up with one more thing. So it started with mercury. Obviously, that's the worst. And obviously, with the numbers that we now know, how many people have mercury in their head, um, it's no wonder that people are in the state of health that they are. But I truly believe this is by design because, my God, in 2026, how could you still put mercury in a human being and say it's okay? I don't give it. I could care less what excuse that people have to say, well, we can't stop using it because, poor people, what are they going to get or whatever. I mean, there's no excuses. You're poisoning people for profit. You're poisoning them intentionally. And these people are going to live and die with it because they'll never be able to take it out safely. I mean, people that are trying to find a biological dentist now, wherever they may be, like if they're in middle America, they can't even find one. So what are we talking about? We're talking by a known neurotoxin, and we all know how toxic mercury is. And the research that the guys that you mentioned earlier, and that's in Noel's article, they were the premier researchers on mercury, not only in dentistry, but also in vaccines. So these guys, they know everything. So that when the, they published several papers until the father passed away last March, and David is now carrying the banner of the family. But they published research using that NIH data that I told you about earlier, and they found that there's a correlation between mercury fillings and asthma. They looked at arthritis. They're looking at all these different things for clinical research and doing statistical analysis to show that if you have this amount of mercury in your head, your propensity to develop this disease is X. And they're showing it. And
Wow.
they're using, this is the beauty, they are using the U.S. government funded research information. So you can't deny it. It's the same with this press release. How are you going to say that it's speculative when you're sitting with the document in your hand saying, okay, this is an email and this came from this person and this is part of the study. I mean, it's there in black and white, but they don't want to touch it. They don't want to touch it. And this is not a good thing because if we're still being censored, we think we have freedom, but
The press release,
it's
the press release being censored by this whatever they're called. Hang on a second, I can't even remember what they were called. Oh yeah,
EIN.
yeah, EIN press wire is really frustrating. I mean, it's like, come on, why are you censoring something that is, like you said, it's FOIA documents. You've got the emails. You know what it is. I mean, it's an old case from the early 2000s about sexual abuse where people went to jail, and it's a Mercury study. It's all public information, but they don't like the narrative. And the same thing. I mean, the same thing is happening in other places. If you've got that one topic that's just a little sensitive. I mean, I had a video taken down by TikTok the other day because I mentioned election fraud, and they freaked out. Oh, that's a cherished institution of our democracy, and you can't question it. And it's like, okay, all right, whatever. So it's the same mentality. There are still, and I think it's a lot of it's. Well, I won't get into the generational aspect of it, but it does just seem that people don't want to change their minds. People don't want to admit that they're wrong. And then, like you said, there's a profit motive there. Anita, thank you for coming on. I want to give you the last word. If you can tell people where they need to go, if they want to go somewhere to find more of your work or an organization's work about this, where can they find out more information?
I think if I could give you some notes that you could put it at the bottom. This whole Casa Pia story, this is what needs to go viral. And I just hope that if you can provide them that information, I can be found on LinkedIn. My name, Anita Tibau. I post things there, and that's usually my main frame where I go to because it's more science oriented, but I'm also on Facebook and I'm also on Instagram. Um, I'm doing my best. I'm also on X, and people are working tirelessly to expose this because once the world knows that a study that was done that poisoned little kids, now mind you, we were talking about the amount of fillings in people's heads. These kids had up to 19 mercury fillings in their heads. They lowered the IQ to do this research on these kids that were already considered handicapped.
Wow.
So, I mean, when you look at the whole big picture of this thing, people should go to jail for this, and I really mean that.
No.
You know, I'm not afraid to say it. You know, when you torture, you poison kids, you lower the IQ, they're molested, you do nothing. I mean, you know, what conclusion can we come to? What kind of a society are we living in? I mean, we have to do something to help these kids now, even though they're no longer babies. They're like,
Yeah.
30s, early 40s. But we still have to help them. And that's my goal in this whole picture because we will be able to see what their health looks like today. And I know, based on what it was when they were at the study in the beginning, it's not going to be good.
It's not going to be good. Noel Fritsch concludes his article by saying, the children of the Casa Pia amalgam study were among the most vulnerable members of society yet. They were exposed to a known neurotoxin in the name of research. When science ignores risk, consent, and vulnerability, accountability is not optional, it is required. I agree with you, Anita. Jail time here would be is required, and yet we'll continue waiting for that accountability. And I want to thank you for your work in this field, trying to get that accountability, and also make people healthier, make America healthier again by getting the information out so people can make different choices, and not the medical industrial complex conventional wisdom, which so often makes us sicker and less healthy. So thank you so much for being on the program. We really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. You're an angel because you're fighting the battle and you're helping to expose the truth.
Well,
what more can I ask?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Folks, we're going to take a quick timeout and a break. We're going to be right back here in a minute to wrap up the rest of the show.